So what is Gaza teaching the world? Many things. Since the outbreak of this genocide, we've seen the perpetrators increase in their aggression, increase in their genocide and their mass killing of innocent Palestinians, destruction of homes, killing of men, women, so many children and babies. We've seen that it's still happening. We're seeing that every single day. Whenever you find acts of mass killing and genocide like we're seeing today, you find groups of people begin to emerge. You find always here the perpetrators, the Zionist machine, the Zionist government committing its barbarity against innocent Palestinians. You find the victims, in this case the people of Gaza, Palestine. You find women and children and babies and small people, and you find all sorts of people as victims in this. You find aid workers, you find campaigners, you'll find all sorts of people, doctors, medics, nurses. And then you find the bystanders, and you find those who simply watch the show. This isn't the first time, in fact, it's a repeated thing in human history. Whenever you find mass killing, genocide, victimization, perpetration, you always find bystanding. You find those who simply sit back and watch the show happening. Some years ago, I remember the scene on hilltops of Sderot in occupied Palestine, when they would drop bombs on Gaza, and you found these Zionists gathering on the hilltops of Sderot and watching as the bombs dropped, and they would take with them, candy floss, and they would take with them like popcorn and things, food, to entertain themselves while watching the bombs drop, as if they're watching some kind of a movie or a show. It's very reminiscent, in fact, on how you found white people perpetrating aggression against blacks as victims of lynching in America. Very, very similar. How they would gather in public squares, and lots of them, and thousands sometimes, and they would watch and they would entertain themselves. And they had candy floss, and they had soda pop, and they had popcorn, and they would have all these different delights and different entertainment purposes, shows for the purpose of making it a spectacle of suffering. A spectacle of suffering. It happens a lot. You have, of course, like smaller versions of that in school bullying, when you have people like egging people on, fight, fight, fight. You had a happy slapping craze here in England some years ago. You have it all the time, in fact, in different ways and forms. So here you have, of course, the world as spectators. Now there is something about a person's consciousness and a person's heart where it is. Because empathy is not one thing. It's different. You have empty empathy. Empty as in just a spontaneous feeling of sympathy, pity for somebody in the suffering is empty empathy. You have a witness empathy on the other extreme or other side of it. Witness empathy like empathizing, but then that empathy driving a person to try and help somebody in their suffering. Witness empathy, like trying to alleviate someone's suffering, as opposed to just having a spontaneous feeling of sadness or pity for someone. So you find both, in fact, in our world today. You find those who are just spectators, and they might have an empathy, but it's simply an empty empathy. It's like the poem of Caroline Duffy that says that we shed our tears between baths and pre-lunch bears in her poem, War Photographer. Meaning, we might be sad, but it's a sadness that's just kind of sedated by the commonplace of life, or the recurring nature of life, or other things to do in life, and meaning it's just always happening in life, whatever it could be. But then you find those who are rescuers. You find those who are not just bystanders here, no, but they're rescuers. There are those who are made of a different kind of substance for a different purpose. That whenever they see anybody in suffering, they want to help that person. They have a witness empathy. Rescuers, a beautiful thing. What does it mean to be a rescuer? It means to be a rescuer, you have not just a heightened level of empathy, that you want to help somebody in need, in their suffering, but you realize the importance of being brave and courageous when the time demands it. Now is the time, and it's demanding it, to be courageous. To be courageous in words, to be courageous in action, to be courageous in spirit, to have moral courage in you. It means not just to have courage, isn't just the absence of fear, but to encounter fear and to triumph over fear is what courage is. Not just the absence of fear, but the triumph over fear is what courage is. And I think in our world today, when you have such barbarity meted out against an innocent people, as in Gaza, Palestine right now, it's upon all of us, to have some degree of courage, some degree of speaking out against such evil, some degree of using our person, our voice, our capacity in pushing back against such dehumanization of Palestinians, such barbarity, war waged against them, to use our capacity, our money in alleviating the needs of people, to use our capacity to try and think about the moral support here. One thing that we've seen, of course, this is quite remarkable in this time, that we've seen remarkable sense of mobilization effort of the Muslims and people who are conscientious in not just objecting to that suffering, but conscientious in wanting to help people in their suffering. Conscientious people have a degree of heightened empathy, a mobilizing of that. And we've seen it across the world in demonstrations, in protests, and in stopping the war manufacturing, the weapons making here in England, for example. Campaigning against senators and governors and MPs who refused to vote on ceasefire or promoted a non-ceasefire agenda. Campaigning, speaking, rallying, the calls are much higher in our world today. This is kind of all within the paradigm of rescuing, having an ethos of rescuing about yourself, being courageous. And so therefore that's a great lesson that we're learning from Gaza today. What does it mean to be courageous? What does it mean to be a rescuer? What does it mean to be not a bystander, but somebody who in all cases, not just having a moral compassion, but having a compassionate consistency. Right now, for example, we find this waking up from Gaza, an awakening from Gaza, because we're seeing the need of a time, but that really is a need for all times, to be campaigners against all injustice, against all people in Palestine, in Gaza, in Kashmir, in all places around the world, wherever we're finding suffering. So therefore, Gaza is teaching us many lessons, and this is one of them: to be rescuers and to be courageous. To be courageous. In the Quran, we find so many examples of courage being displayed. Amazing examples. Like, for example, the examples of Prophet Moses, Musa alayhi salam, against Pharaoh. But it's not just that Pharaoh and Moses here are kind of diametrically juxtaposed individual actors in this, but you have so many actors around the scene. You have the mother of Moses, brave and courageous. You have the magicians. By the way, it's the whole scene. You have those on the side of Pharaoh, like Pharaoh, Haman, Qarun. Magicians are there. And the magicians are kind of like the media mouthpiece that kind of speaks the language of the Pharaoh, that validates the Pharaoh's existence. The magicians are necessary because they're like the media output. People believe in the Pharaoh because of the magicians. Just like today, for example, when you find so many fake stories, I'll cover that inshallah next episode, about the fake stories and how they kind of proliferate, what people believe, and how that image of the otherized, dehumanized Palestinians created by these fake stories, just like what led now to the war in the genocide in Gaza. Fake stories, which of course all been debunked today. But the first one, of course, is the element of thinking deeply about courage and its importance. So here we have magicians around Pharaoh. You have Harun, Aaron, the brother of Musa, brave and courageous. You have so many actors, so many people involved in this. You have the wife of Pharaoh, Asiya, brave and courageous in believing in Allah, believing in Musa, as opposed to believing in her husband. So many people are involved in it. But then there comes a point where a point of no return has arrived. And one example, of course, is in the magicians of Fir'aun. Because in their capacity, when they believed in Allah, and they recognized the truth of Musa because they believed in this is beyond magic, when what he's doing, this is truth from Allah, a miracle from Allah, they all bowed. Allah says that they all bowed, they fell down in prostration. And they said that we believe in Musa, in the Lord of Moses. And then Pharaoh threatened them, that you believe without me giving you permission to believe in him. And they said that just do whatever you want to do, all you can do is life of this world, meaning that point of no return had arrived. They weren't going back in this. They weren't going back. And this is where we are. We won't go back in this. It's beyond like the sadism in the killing machine of the Zionist entity committed against Palestinians is beyond sadistic. It's reached a point of no return. You can't go back from this. Forever has changed our perception of the so-called new world, the modern world. It's changed our perception of this. What does it mean? What do human rights mean now anymore? What does United Nations even mean? What is human rights? What do these things even mean anymore? How would you counterbalance these things with respect to what's happened and the silence about Gaza? It's beyond the point of return. And this is something key for us to remember. So therefore, courage in these people, in Moses, in Musa, and his mother, and the wife of Fir'aun, and believing in Musa, all these things show a great amount of courage. But there's many other examples in the Quran as well. You have the example in Surah Al-Ghafir in the Quran. This is about a story about a man in there who never spoke. He never spoke. He was scared to speak because it was fearful for him to speak. And Allah says about him that this is a man who رَجُلٌ مُؤْمِنٌ مِنْ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ يَكْتُمُ إِيمَانَهُ. He was a believer from Pharaoh's people, and he hid his faith. He hid his faith because he was scared to speak. But then there came a time where he had to speak. And the first thing he said was about injustice connected to belief. He says to Pharaoh, his people, he says, why would you kill a man? Would you kill a man because he says, my Lord is Allah? Would you kill a man because he says, my Lord is Allah? Meaning, is that the reason why you're killing a person? Because he says, my Lord is Allah? And then you find something amazing happening in that chapter. You find in the Quran examples where prophets say, Ya qawmi, O my people. And there is a kind of an element of compassion here. Not just courage, but compassionate courage, because they have concern for the people. Oh, my people, meaning, oh, the people I live with, oh, the people we share the same kind of food habits and culture. Oh, my people, right? But in this example, the most times in the Quran this is mentioned is about this person who never spoke, but then he spoke. He never spoke, but when he spoke, he spoke. Oh, my people, 6 times in that chapter. And there even comes a point where, by 6 times concerning him, he's saying it. And even comes a point where, there's other verses and you forget, who's actually speaking here? And Allah says, وَقَالَ الَّذِي آمَنَ, said the man who believed. Said the man who believed and spoke. It's him still speaking. And it's a beautiful display of remarkable courage, in this person. So, and of course, you have him and you have the man who came running in Surah Yasin, the man who came running to deliver a message on behalf of the messengers of Allah. So many examples in the Quran, so many. Every prophet, of course, was courageous in delivering his message to his people. The most courageous of all people was none other than the Prophet of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was described as Ahsan al-Nas wa Ajwad al-Nas wa Ashja al-Nas by Anas bin Malik, that he was the most beautiful of people and the most generous of people and the bravest of all people. Beauty, generosity, and bravery in his character. And the companions would say that when we were fighting, we would fight behind him because he would always be at the front of the fighting. The bravest person was him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And his character, and then the way that he exemplified bravery in his companions and how they became brave and so strong. Even though, look at Ibn Mas'ud, for example. radiallahu anh, a person who was very skinny. You know, he was very skinny. He was so like thin and skinny that one time in Medina, he was climbing up a tree to fetch something, and the wind blew and it almost blew him off the tree, and his shins were exposed, and the companions began to laugh. And the Prophet says, why do you laugh? And they said, we're laughing because he's thin, his shins are so skinny, so thin. And the Prophet says, yeah, but his shins are heavier than Mount Uhud on the Day of Judgment. Those two legs of his will be heavier, meaning it's not about what a person is in this life, it's about what those things mean in the next life. SubhanAllah. You know, look at the example of Bilal ibn Rabah al-Habashi, radiallahu anh, the one who was an Abyssinian slave, becomes a Muslim. And when he has this amazing spirit of like a warrior courage spirit inside of him. Because they would stick idols in his face and they would say, Kul Allat wal Uzza, say the names of Lat and Uzza. And Bilal would say, Inna lisani la yuhsinuhu, my tongue is simply incapable of saying those names. My tongue can't say those names. And they would beat him and he would say, Ahadun, Ahad, the one Allah, the one Allah. They would say the names of our God, he would say, Ahadun, Ahad, the one Allah, one Allah. Meaning, it's a remarkable courage, spirit of resistance in companions of the Prophet and so many others. And there's the women, Nusayba, and so many women were such brave people, sometimes fighting in the battle, sometimes on the outside, but just having that spirit of courage around them and doing what they could do. Children, you know, men, women, all people, courage and resistance, a very powerful thing. So we find, therefore, one thing that we're learning, we're being taught by the people of Gaza, is the importance of courage, is the importance of resistance, is the importance of being rescuers. So many, of course, in Gaza are themselves the rescuers of themselves. Not only do they have such immense belief and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's a kind of a form of self-rescuing, as opposed to calling upon other people for assistance. They're simply calling upon Allah for assistance, that it's God that they trust in. But even amongst themselves, you find a beautiful sense of, you know, just magnanimity, dignity, in how they carry themselves. And I'll cover this, inshallah, in the next video or another video, the sense of dignity in the people of Gaza, that we're learning that lesson from them. So therefore, in summary, what we're learning from people of Gaza now, of course, are many things, but of them are courage, resistance, bravery. You know, sometimes we might travel the world and see these kind of, you know, landmarks of that signpost. Someone was once courageous at this point, at this spot. I remember when I was in Sarajevo, and in Bosnia and Sarajevo, you have this war tunnel. They call it Tunnel of Hope. And so what is where Sarajevo airport was, or is still maybe. But under the airport, they built this tunnel. And during the war in Bosnia and the siege of Sarajevo, one of the longest lasting sieges in the world, you know, you had sniper attacks, you know, from the mountains, from the woods, and these poor Bosnians, Muslims, couldn't escape. And so they had this amazing idea of digging a tunnel under the airport. And they had 160 people, 130 odd from either side. And they would dig, and they would have like these shifts of digging. And they would dig and dig and dig, you know, for a long distance, for a long time, I think 6 hours each. And at the end of the digging, there was a woman waiting for them called Mrs. Sada Kalar. I think the digging began under her home. And all she would do, she would give these diggers a glass of water. I mean, that's her capacity. That's what she would do in that situation. That's all she could do, is give them water to help them. So everybody has a role. Everybody has a capacity. Everybody has a skill set. And it's about, what Gaza is teaching us is about using that skill set, having that sense of capacity in you. Maybe sometimes, you know, you don't know what strengths you have. But in the prophetic paradigm, it's about believing that you have courage. Always believing you have courage, and that would kind of manifest in different ways. In the prophetic, in the battle of Hamra al-Asad, this is after Battle of Uhud, in the Prophet's time in Medina, when the pagans wanted revenge for Badr, and And the Prophet, when he heard the news that they want to fight the next day at Hamra al-Asad, he calls Bilal and he says to Bilal, make an announcement, and I want you to announce that we will fight tomorrow, but no one can come with us tomorrow except the one who was with us yesterday. Meaning the one who fought with us yesterday, meaning the ones who are still bruised and battered and bleeding and mourning their family members dying, those ones have to fight the next day. Showing them the spirit of courage, showing the pagans that we will send our old ones to fight against you who fought yesterday, as opposed to any new recruits. Again, and then they never turned up, the pagans. Maybe they were scared of that. Showing them the resistance. And it was in that moment when the pagans, when the hypocrites came and they said, you know what, the people have gathered against you, so you should be worried, you should fear them, فَخْشَوْهُمْ, worry for them, be scared of them. And Allah in the Quran says, فَزَادُهُمْ إِيمَانًا, it increased them in their faith when they heard those words, in belief. And they said, حَسْبُنَ اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ, sufficient for us is Allah, and the best disposer of affairs. Exactly what the believers are saying today in Gaza. حَسْبُنَ اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ, sufficient for us is Allah, and the best disposer of affairs. And so people are becoming Muslim today because they're just amazed. How could people have such resolve and character and spirit in the most difficult of circumstances? So therefore, we're learning the importance of courage, the importance of spirit. You know, it was once said that courage is not always a loud roar, you know, but sometimes courage is a small voice in the back of your head that's saying, I'll keep trying tomorrow. And the point is that the deliverance of a people is based upon so many days and so many occasions, so many nights of courage and resistance, meaning a continuation of trying, as opposed to one single event, but a continuation of striving, of trying one's best. And we're seeing that in the people of Gaza today. We're seeing that in the women, sometimes giving birth in tents. We're seeing that in the children, babies. Sometimes they lose their. There was a video of a boy, you know, carrying his friend on his back. He must have been like six or 7 years old, but carrying his friend on his back. His friend had been killed. The boy had lived, and he's saying, like, you know, this was my friend and I got to bury my friend, you know. Where do you find people like that? Where do you find examples of that? Where do you find situations like that? And the whole world is seeing that. The whole world is learning something so profound it's never seen before. So not only are we learning the barbarity of the Zionist, you know, machinery, not only are we seeing that them and those who support them, how evil and sadistic and vicious they are. We're of course, we're all seeing that. But we're also seeing the magnanimity and the dignity of people of Gaza, who hold their head up high in courage and bravery, and they say, we won't give up. And they're saying, sufficient for us is Allah, and the best disposer of affairs. So that's the first episode about what we learned from Gaza. And we have, therefore, the points of courage and bravery and resistance as very powerful and strong paradigms that we can all take lessons from today.